Before listening to this sermon, if you could read Genesis 1, verse 1, all the way up to chapter 2, verse 3. And we're going to look at three things: in the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. Whenever somebody makes something, the person creating it usually has a purpose in mind. And that thing that they create is either good at that purpose, achieving that purpose, or bad at achieving that purpose. So say, for example, the purpose of this might be to act as a novelty egg cup. If the egg stays nicely in the egg cup, then it's good. It's achieved its purpose. If when you put the egg in, it falls out, then it's bad. It's not good at achieving its purpose. All created things have a purpose, and every created thing is judged by us as either being good or bad. I want you to keep that in mind as we read through verses 1 and 2. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. When the Bible uses the word heavens, it means everything we see above us, sky, space, and whatever is beyond that. So when verse 1 says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, it is saying that God created everything. Everything we see below us, i.e. earth and sea, as well as everything we see above us and around us as well. Verse 2, now the earth was formless and empty. The initial thing God created sounds a bit like it's a blob of Play-Doh. It was formless, it had no purpose or design to it. It was also empty. If you opened the fridge and discovered mouldy bread and off milk, you'd describe it as bad. If you opened the fridge and it was full of milk chocolate, you'd describe it as good. But if you opened the fridge and it was empty, you could not describe its contents as either positively good or negatively bad. Emptiness is neither. So when verse 2 says that the earth was formless and empty, it is saying that the initial thing God created was a bit like a bit of Play-Doh. It had no purpose to it. It was neither positively good or negatively bad. If God's act of creation had finished there, we could conclude the following about God. God had no purpose, no desire, no aim in mind when he created this initial lump of mass. And the God who created it is neither positively good or negatively bad. But God did not put his tools and stop there. As we read on, we discover that God formed something very good out of this initial lump of materials. Something very good that had a purpose. That's why we read the words, and God saw that it was good, 7 times in chapter 1. Then twice we read the phrase, and God blessed them, human beings. In other words, God created this world positively good, originally. And his purpose, his desire, his aim in creating it was to express his goodness towards the likes of you and me. This is the central message of Genesis chapter 1. So regardless of your opinion on the Big Bang or evolution or some other hotly debated topic, this is Genesis chapter 1's main point. God created this world positively good, and his purpose, his desire, his aim in creating it was to express his goodness towards human beings. We see this at every stage in God's act of creation. For example, day 1. My guess is that on day 1 of moving into your current house, the first thing you did was erect your bed or rolled out your sleeping mat. And we see God doing exactly the same on day 1. For on day 1, God created the light of day and established day and night. A period of daylight that corresponds exactly to the amount of time we are active before, generally speaking, we begin to tire. a period of night that corresponds exactly to the average amount of sleep a person needs. God is doing the equivalent of erecting a cot for his soon-to-be-born children. And so we see already on day one, God working towards a set purpose to establish a home that is uniquely designed for human beings. On days 2 and 3, construction of this new home continues. On day 2, God separates the sky from the earth. On day 3, God separates the lands from the sea, the land being revealed later as the home for us humans. God then continues by setting up a table with a spread of fruit. Verse 11, Then God said, Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds. And it was so. God built the world's first supermarket right on the doorstep of humanity's new home. And in every supermarket, fresh fruit and veg is always the first aisle that you come to. Supermarkets do this because something about fresh fruit is so appealing and inviting. So much so that you can see toddlers eating grapes and peeling bananas as you walk around the supermarket. I'm sure you've all seen it. Unlike everything else in the supermarket, most fresh fruit isn't packaged. Toddlers interpret this as, help yourself. And in much the same way, God caused fresh fruit and veg to be spontaneously produced. God inviting humans to help yourself. Yet again, another example of God's purpose in creation, to express his goodness towards the likes of you and me. Day 4. Now, this is my diary. It cost me roughly 50p. And you don't need to, it just proves that you don't need to spend much to be able to understand what day of the day it is or what month it is. All you need is a 50p diary like this. But if you if you go on the internet and type in wristwatches and you go on eBay, you'll discover that there are watches that are as cheap as 99p. Obviously, that's the cheapest you can get. You can also get Rolexes that are worth over 200 grand. But it just proves that if you want, all you want is to tell the time or know what day of the week it is, you don't need to spend a lot. Of course, if you're buying a watch for someone you love, you might be willing to spend a little bit more. We need to keep that in mind as you hear verse 14 read again. And God said, Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years. God didn't spend 50p per human to buy us all cheap and tacky diaries like this. Instead, God went extra extravagant and created the sun and the moon so that we could tell the time and establish a calendar. Beautiful sunsets and sunrises just so we could know that it's morning and evening. Full moons and new moons so that we could measure the months. God created the earth to spin on its axis and orbit the sun, all so that we could divide the year into 365 days. If God didn't do this, none of us would know what day or time it is. None of us would be able to celebrate our birthday or set apart any other day as special, because we'd have no way of telling the time or date. But God blew the budget and gave us something way more impressive than the most expensive Rolex watch. God said, Let the lights in the sky serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light, the moon, to govern the night. And what did God do next? verse 16. He also made the stars. After taking a few seconds to form the 100 million kilometer wide fireball that we call the sun, God still had time and energy left on his hands. And so what did God do? He created the stars, over 100 billion in our galaxy alone. On day 4, God went to astronomical lengths to put his goodness, wisdom, and power on display for all of us to see. And so even though none of us were there to see the mechanics of exactly how God did it, everything we see in our world today matches up. The wisdom behind creation is mind-blowing. So much in creation is good. The power that put it into motion is amazing. And after days 5 and 6, God put his signature at the end. Chapter 2, verse 2. By the 7th day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the 7th day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. Like an artist signing his painting, God signs his signature in these verses 3 times. God finished the work he had been doing. He rested from all his work. On the 7th day, he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. The wisdom, power, and goodness we see in our created world is meant to tell us something about its author. God created this world positively good because he is good. And God's purpose, his desire, his aim in creating it was to express his goodness toward us human beings. This is page 1 stuff. The simple and clear declaration of the universe and the Bible. As we read in Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God. The sky proclaims the works of his hands. Romans 1. Since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made. This is page 1 stuff in the Bible. But what do we see on page 2 of the Bible? What characterizes the middle of the story? Well, come to North Shields Evangelical Church next week to find out, when we will be looking at that for us in more detail. But basically on page 2, Genesis chapter 3, we see humanity, Adam and Eve, turning their back on the infinite goodness of God. They doubt God's wisdom. They question God's goodness. The people who God created rebel against their Creator. And this isn't just Adam and Eve stuff. It isn't just atheists and religious skeptics who do this kind of thing. This is the condition of all. Despite hearing this sermon today, I can guarantee that in the next week, at some point, you will find yourself asking yourself, is God really that wise? Does God really have my best interests at heart? Is turning my back on him really that big a deal? Our internal bias is to be skeptical of God's goodness and question his wisdom. We are just like what I imagine Moses, the author of Genesis, was when God inspired him to write verses 20 and 21. Verses 20 and 21. And God said, "Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures." Just do a little survey in your head. Just think, how many fish have you ever actually seen in the flesh? Include any that you've seen in the sea, or any you've seen on your dinner plate. Fish that you've seen on holiday, fish that you've seen on TV, fish that you've seen at the Sea Life Centre, they don't count. Just think of any that you've seen in the sea, or any you've seen on your dinner plate. Don't know how many you have, but Moses, who got inspired to write the book of Genesis, grew up in Egypt. He never flew off on any scuba diving holidays. And Egypt didn't have a sea life centre where he could view exotic fish. So the number of fish Moses had ever seen or heard about probably numbered about, I don't know, let's say 10. So when God inspired Moses to write down verses 20 and 21, I can quite imagine Moses doing this. Right, God, what do you want me to say happened on day 5? You made the waters swarm with sea creatures. Are you sure you meant to use the word swarm? I mean, I know David Attenborough seems to see a lot of fish, but every time I go to the seaside, I see nothing. Are you really sure you created the sea swarming with sea life? I mean, I'd hardly call 10 varieties of fish an abundance of sea creatures, and most of the fish that I know about are pretty much all the same. Cod, haddock, pollock, mackerel. They're really all the same design, really. Not very inventive. I really think, God, that by saying you made the sea swarm with sea life, you're kind of showing off. Couldn't we write the word swarm in the Bible with an asterisk at the end? And God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures. Small print. I mean, a handful of different varieties of fish that all look boringly the same. In other words, God, I don't really think you're as powerful and creative as you like to make out, really. So, in my made-up debate between Moses and God, who was right? Did God make the sea swarm with sea life? Does God exaggerate when he speaks of his great wisdom and power? Well, as humans, we have explored a mere 5% of the ocean, and so far we've discovered more than 200,000 different species of sea life, with an estimated 2 million species yet to still be discovered. We've discovered all sorts. Just go on Google Images and type weird fish or something like that, and you'll discover all the amazing swarms, different varieties of fish that God has made. We've got see-through fish. We've got blow-up fish, the ones that puff up and blow up. We've got fish that change colour. We've got fish that have their own fridge built onto their bellies. We've got fish that can create their own light sources. We've got beautiful fish. We've got really ugly fish. We've got large fish. We've got millions of small fish. Sail into the middle of the ocean and look down, and you'll see just how clever God is. Look up from your boat at the billions of visible stars, and you'll get a sense of God's infinite power. The point is clear. The wisdom, the power, and goodness we see in the created world is meant to teach us a right view of God. God is astronomically powerful and infinitely wiser than us. And God's purpose, his desire, his aim in creating all of this was to express his goodness towards human beings. But just let's pause for a minute. What follows pages 1 and 2 of the Bible is page 3. And on page 3 we read about the consequences of humanity's turning away from God. Theologians call the consequences the fall. It's a good name because when something falls, the force of gravity forces it downwards. And the force of gravity is something that nobody can resist. In much the same way, none of us can resist the aging process. None of us can avoid death. Double vaccinated or not, none of us can avoid pain, difficulty, and disease. We're all in a constant battle, trying to resist and avoid the suffering and the other bad things that characterize this fallen world. These things came into the world because of humanity's sin, as will be explained next week when Ronnie takes the service. So though God created the world perfectly good, with the purpose of saturating us with his goodness, though God created the world perfectly good, it is certainly not like that now. I don't know, just think, does that match up with your experience of life? A constant battle trying to resist and avoid difficulty, but mainly ending up on the losing side. Well, that's the bad news, but there is good news. God has given us a promise about the end. The end. The Bible basically follows the same storyline as the famous book, The Hobbit. And if you know the book The Hobbit, it has the following subtitle: There and Back Again. There and Back Again. The Hobbit begins with Bilbo Baggins enjoying life in his rural shire, a life filled with joy in his peaceful surroundings, eating breakfast, second breakfast, elevenses, luncheon, afternoon tea, and dinner. It sounds great. But then something happens, and Bilbo enters more sinister territory. From that moment he experiences pain, anxiety, and sadness for the first time. But the good news is, J.R. Tolkien titled the book There and Back Again. Spoiler alert, at the end of the story, Bilbo returns to the Shire. Bilbo returns and again experiences joy and peace, with pain and sadness becoming a thing of the past. At least till the Lord of the Rings. There and Back Again is the story of the Hobbit. There and Back Again is the story of the Bible. Let's jump from page 1 of the Bible to the last pages, in which we read these words. Revelation 21. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a beautiful bride, dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Look, God's dwelling is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. I don't have time to read everything from the last 2 pages of the Bible, but basically it's a picture of the future. A picture of the future in which God restores the heavens and the earth to the perfected state we read of in Genesis chapter 1. There and back again. Page 1 of the Bible, conditions of perfection. Page 2 onwards, conditions of difficulty and frustration. That's what we experience now. The last page of the Bible, God's promises about the future. Back again to conditions of perfection, characterized by eternal peace and infinite joy. The wonderful hope of Christianity can be summarized as there and back again. Through faith in Jesus, believers look forward to a time when God will return the world back again to something more like its original state, except better.